Clean eating is the evidence-based weight loss approach. Hey everybody, I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. And this is funny because you have the whole cult of flexible dieting online, and it's massive, it's enormous. It has been for over a decade. In the entire time I've been doing social media stuff, which I started putting out videos in 2012, right? I started making fitness and lifting related videos in 2012 on at least one platform. And now I have a couple. But that being said, you've always seen this cult, and they always say things, oh, that's pseudoscience, the clean eating, that if it fits your macros and counting your macros and your calories is the evidence-based approach. But that's nonsense. That's actually not based on reality. And here's what I mean. A couple things to think about. When you look at different studies on food types, it absolutely matters for weight loss. And the overwhelming evidence suggests that. The overwhelming evidence also suggests that even when certain macros are kept constant, the type of those macros absolutely impacts fat loss. It absolutely impacts appetite specifically, and appetite being the big thing, because realistically, appetite control and adherence is the key to fat loss. Okay? If you cannot consistently create a calorie deficit, then you're going to fail. Okay? And when people start looking at doing a lot of the flexible dieting, they actually have a higher tendency to overeat. And that's not my opinion. That's the observation of many coaches, along with the overall evidence. Okay? Along with the overall evidence. You start looking at satiety scores of food. All right? You just go look at even satiety scores of different carbohydrates. They vary a lot. Potatoes being near the top of the list. So again, you can't tell me that potatoes or oats are not vastly superior to, say, refined sugars for fat loss. One makes you hungry, one makes you lethargic, one can crash your energy levels. The other has a much higher satiety index when it's been measured in the lab of how full do you feel. Okay, that's a massive factor. And they don't always want to address that. There was and really what it is the flexible dieting wants to maintain the horrible American lifestyle and eating garbage. They want to be able to find a way to maintain that and still make it fit. And I'm not saying it can't do it. And I'm not saying many of them are not successful doing so, but a whole lot of them fail. And what we have to remember, that's still not necessarily optimal. Just because they can pull it off doesn't mean it's ideal for your health to be working in, 500 calories a cake every day. Okay? If you're allowed 2,300 calories or whatever it happens to be, right? This is not based on evidence. This is based upon emotion and food addiction and the desire to eat junk food because you're addicted to it. Okay? It has nothing to do with evidence. Nothing to do with it. All right, so when we start looking at a lot of that, we're going to talk about calories and stuff in a minute too. That is critical. It's absolutely critical. But let's talk about the whole bro approach. A lot of them are like, oh, you don't have to count calories. If you just eat really clean, you'll lose body fat. Okay? Now, do you still need a calorie deficit? Yes. However, how many people have been successful at doing that? How many competitive bodybuilders have gotten shredded without really directly tracking the calories or macros? A lot of them. So it shows it's absolutely possible. So what's the basis of that? Well, chicken, brown rice, and broccoli are very satiating. I'm not saying to eat that exact thing. That is a textbook clean bro diet meal. It's hard to overeat chicken breast, lean chicken with very little fat, because we know lower fat diets, right? Whole grain carbohydrate, plenty of fiber, vegetables, and a high protein. It's hard to overeat that. Most people over time, if they've been eating other foods, they shift to something like that, they're going to end up generally being in a calorie deficit. Okay? If that's the way they're eating all the time, they're going to drift towards a calorie deficit, or at least considerably lower calories than they've been consuming. So what's the net effect? It's probably going to be easier to get leaner, even if they don't track. So again, we need to be clear on that point. And you cannot discount that point. Okay? You cannot discount it. Massive. All right, so you have that, and then again, you look at all the satiety, the ability to control appetite. Then we start looking at other things involved. How about, again, the protein intake? Because really clean eating tends to be high in protein, tends to be high in fiber. What do we see in studies looking at both? Higher thermic effects, better satiety, better recomposition of the body. Okay? And in other words, high protein foods, satiating, help you build muscle, help you burn fat. Again, look at some of the protein overfeeding studies. They almost defy our traditional concept of calories in and calories out. And they're not actually doing so. It's just that they do some things on the calories outside. Well, same thing with fiber. Same thing with a lot of more whole foods. What do we find in the research? That whole foods oftentimes impact your calories out more. In other words, breaking a lot of them down, especially higher fiber foods, less refined foods, many of them, we expend more calories breaking them down than similar calorie value of other foods that might have similar macro counts. Let me state that again. We burn more energy breaking them down. So there ends up being a higher energy output. So if you're on 3,000 calories of one type of food versus 3,000 calories of another type, you may actually have a 200 calorie deficit difference, even while the macros and stuff are the same, because the cleaner foods, as we call them, do that. They produce a more thermic effect. So this starts to break down really, really quickly when we start looking at things like appetite. We look at things like thermic effect. Well, what about studies that have looked at food variety? All of them are like, well, this allows us to get a lot more variety and more treats. But what do studies on food variation and variety show? They consistently have shown over the years that people who are on lower variety diets, less food variety, tend to be more successful in their fat loss and weight loss efforts. That is an enormous blow against the other. That is basically saying, because clean eating, you're going to tend to have a lower food variety. You're probably eating more simple foods. That's a win for them. It's the studies, all the studies across multiple nations consistently show more success in fat loss and weight loss. Because again, it's easier to control your appetite when you're not rotating lots of foods in all the time. Okay? So in other words, we need to understand the flexible dieting thing. I'm not saying it cannot work, but for them to pretend that it's the evidence-based approach when all the evidence says otherwise kind of shows that it really is just pseudoscience, and it's a cult based upon an emotional need to eat garbage. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.